So thank you all for coming. Um, this session is going to be on political campaigning and lobbying, or political advocacy, as it's also called. Um, a couple housekeeping things. One, if you can make sure you're muted unless you have questions. Feel free to ask questions by raising your hand or putting it in the chat, and Sandy will be helping with that. For those of you who don't know who I am, because you've never met me, but I think I've met most of you. My name is Eric Nussbaum, and I'm with the Soil and Water Conservation District program. I'm the operations specialist, so essentially I do trainings and such like this for everyone. A long time ago, I actually used to be the manager of the Saisla Soil and Water Conservation District, so I used to do that. Sandy here, who's helping me out, of course, most of you know through elections and also being the grant manager. I'm getting all these annoying pop-ups as people come in and it blocks my screen. So I think what we'll do is we'll get started. So I love questions. If you have no questions, this might be a very fast presentation. If you have lots of questions, it might be a long one. I'm hoping for it to be a little bit on the longer side. So that means you have lots of good questions and stuff like that. This is going to be, as I said, mostly on political advocacy, campaigning, a little bit on lobbying, mostly the laws about that and recruitment. At the very end, if you have any questions that haven't been resolved by talking to Sandy about some of the new election issues, she'll be available to take any questions about that. So there will be time for those questions regarding the new alternative address for folks running for office, and then also if there happens to be anything about the new eligibility requirements or any other things related to the elections, Sandy can answer those at the end. So if you do have questions related to that, just hold on to those at the very end. Other than that, I think we'll get started. It looks like it's kind of slowed down. We have a nice crowd here. So these are the topics I'm going to talk about a little bit today, we'll just go through these. Again, if you have any questions, just go ahead and ask. The biggest resource that I hope that all of you will go to is published by the Oregon Secretary of State. It's called The Restrictions on Political Advocacy by Public Employees, but it also has stuff for about elected officials in there. And it's available both on our website and also through the Secretary of State's website. So if you go to ODA's website and then you go to the SWCD program area, then under elections, you will find a whole list of resources, including this. And I do highly suggest getting this. As one of the things that I'll talk about is there are some requirements as an employer regarding posting about political advocacy in your office. So the first thing that I've been getting the most questions about, and kind of what instigated this whole thing, is about recruitment. So I've answered many of the questions, and tomorrow night I borrowed this from I think it keeps coming up in my Facebook feed and my Instagram feed, both from the Upper Willamette and other places, which is great. This is an information session. There's another one. I tried to find it, Al, on that's from the Upper Willamette, which says, please join our board or stuff like that. There's another, it's more of an advertisement, so I can actually find it, because only if it comes up as an ad. But Upper Willamette's actually put out an ad through Facebook and Instagram recruiting for directors. So director recruitment is allowed, and it should really be done, in a non-biased way, opening up to everyone. And I love this information session that it's information-based. I do get a lot of questions about whether or not staff or directors can go out and directly try to recruit folks to run for the board. And yes, that is allowed, though I would say be a little careful about it. Even though it's probably still legal, and I'm not going to name any names here, but I did have some staff saying, wow, we really want to get someone off our board because they just don't really work well. We want to find someone to run against them. There's probably not anything illegal about going out and trying to find someone to run against another director, but it surely doesn't look good as an employee. So one of my favorite phrases is just because you can doesn't mean you should. Um, where the dividing line comes, as we'll talk about in a moment, is at that point where someone is actually filing to be on the ballot. And your limitations as an employee has a lot to do with when something is actually on the ballot or been filed to be on the ballot and what you can do. But before that, um, the staff and the directors can go ahead and do recruitment, one-on-one recruitment, talking to landowners as you're out working with them. We to Sayusla, one of our board members was a horse farrier. He talked with a lot of landowners out there, and he was always talking about, hey, do you want to join the board? And another example is Johnny Sundstrom, who recently died. He was recruited on the basketball court by Nolan Huntington in weekly scrimmage game. So things like that are completely fine. But you do want to make sure that, at least for the sake of appearances, you are not biased. You're not trying to recruit to have someone run against someone else, especially as an employee. As an elected official, you have a lot more leeway. It certainly is in your purview if you want to go find someone to run against one of your other directors. You can do that. That's politics. Again, it's about perception. If that may not be the greatest perception, and certainly may hinder your ability to work with that other director in the future. Are there any questions about recruitment? Because that's just kind of a big basic overview. Is there any kind of specific questions that I've heard of? I think the advertisements that like Upper Willamette and the other districts are doing about information sessions or, hey, are you interested in running for the board? Contact us, I think are excellent. And would encourage that kind of recruitment. Putting it into an unbiased recruitment into your newsletter is fine, or on your website is fine. You just got to make sure that they're unbiased. Okay, now we're going to get into political advocacy and what you're allowed to do. These are the three basic rules in statute. Is that none of your directors or someone who's running an office can require a public employee to engage in political advocacy, i.e., hey, you need to go and make a copy of my campaign flyer, or you need to vote for me, or threatening a person by saying, gosh, if you don't vote for me, or say, hey, you don't vote for our tax measure, you'll lose your job. You can't do anything like that, obviously. Also, part of this, too, is something like way back in the day, and some of the people have been around for a long time, will remember probably, we'd get those forms from ODA, where they had to gather the signatures, and we'd pass them around at the board meeting and sign them all. And then as manager, I would drive into Eugene from the coast, and I would get them all signed, and then I'd stick them in an envelope and mail them all off to Salem. Well, that's political advocacy. You're helping specific candidates do the job, and so we hopefully no one is doing that anymore. But that falls under this also about kind of requiring a public employee to engage in political advocacy. So employees may, give advice, long non-biased advice, like someone says, hey, I'm not quite sure how to fill this out. You could, of course, have them call Sandy. As long as you're providing the same information to everyone else, you could help folks do that. All right, Al, I think you have a question there.
Yeah. Okay, my mic's on. Yeah, can staff sign those signature sheets?
Good question. They can, but it must be on their own time, not during work time. So it could be during break, it could be during lunch. And I always say, best not to do it in the office. Go out and do it on the hood of a car outside the office. Okay. Whether it's allowed in the office or not, that's a gray area, but probably best to just go out and do it on the hood of the car. That's what we told directors, hey, after the meeting, before the meeting, everyone go out in the parking lot and everyone can sign each other's if they want. They're not on the clock anymore, hopefully, and it's not being done in the office. That gets to the second point here, is that public employees may not engage in political advocacy while on the job during work hours. and we're going to define what political advocacy actually is in a moment. But that's pretty obvious. We'll get into the fine details of whether it's hourly versus salary, whether representing the district or not. But during work hours, while on the job, they can't engage in certain activities that we'll talk about in a minute. And then finally, there is a poster that you must post. It is actually, I believe, in the back of that reference material that I told you about. Also, a copy of it is available on our website under elections. But you all do need to have in your office a copy of the statutes. And it basically says exactly what this says right here. All right, so what exactly is political advocacy? And essentially, it says there promote or oppose, and it gives you the whole list of things that are on there. Except for like a political committee, which is a PAC, a political action committee. All the other ones, if you notice, are referencing something that is on the ballot. So that is actually the easiest way to think about what you can and can't do. If it is on the ballot, you can't advocate for it during your time as an employee on the job or use district resources. So there's a whole list. Those are all things that are on the ballot. A candidate. So it's once the candidate file is formed. For those who may be going for a tax base, and I know at least one district that might be going for a tax base this fall, the district can promote the idea of a tax base all they want, but once they file that the measure with the county clerk, they can no longer use district resources or talk about it in a pro or con form while on the job. Before things get to the clerk, before they get on the ballot, of course, the district can. Perception, though, is important also to remember, though, just because it might be legal to talk about stuff in a pro or con form beforehand. You may just want to be careful about that because of perception. So what is considered on the job during work hours? Hourly, that's kind of obvious. People who are on the clock and get paid hourly is pretty obvious, kind of they're on the job. Salary can be a little more confusing. The way to think about it is if you're working in an official capacity. So you might be salaried and have an 8 to 5 kind of hourly your job. That's your basic job. But if you are attending meetings outside of your normal hours, like I do, or if you are at some kind of maybe giving a speech somewhere, you're not quite counting it as being officially on the job. You just got to be careful that you're not representing yourself as a district employee while advocating for a measure or a person or something like that. You've got to make sure that if you are discussing it as a salaried employee and you're at something that's kind of semi-official or official, like say a public hearing, maybe you normally go to a county commissioner meeting outside of your normal work hours. Are you there in official capacity or not? If you are there in an official capacity, you got to make sure that you don't start advocating for or against any of these things that might be on the ballot. Any questions about that? Elected officials have a lot more leniency. You're politicians. You get to do a whole lot of extra stuff. So you can take positions on ballot measures. And you can do it as an elected official, and certainly you can use your title. There's a kind of a side comment. A lot of times people ask if, I write a letter to the editor. Am I allowed to write there that I'm a director of, Tualatin SWCD? Yes, you can. Though if you're not representing what the official position of the district is, you got to make sure that you make it clear that this is your personal opinion and not the opinion of the district. However, you are allowed to use your title when doing letters to the editor or anything like that, or speaking somewhere or something like that. You are allowed to use your title. You can actually, and this gets to Al's question about volunteer help from public employees, like signing that or in campaigning about that, but you can only ask them during employee breaks when they're not on the clock or during their personal time outside of work hours. I just talked for a minute there about opinion pieces or letters or something like that. You can do that. Do make sure that you do not publish it in your newsletter or put it on your website, because that's the use of district resources, which is illegal. So you can't go and say, hey, I just wrote this letter to the editor that opposing a certain measure or promoting a certain measure. Please put a copy of it on the website. You can't do that. The other last two there are pretty obvious, and you know, you can't threaten or, you know, ask someone to support or oppose a measure. Those are kind of obvious and stuff like that. The employees get to do their own things. Sandy?
Yes, you stated very clearly they can't put it on their website. Would that also include if they had a Facebook or Instagram feed on their website?
Yes. Yeah.
And what happens if somebody else posts it? Do they need to remove it?
No, because I don't think so, because that wouldn't be them advocating for it. That would be a member of the public advocating for it. But you probably should have clear guidelines about what you do allow or don't allow on your Facebook or Instagram. And that's a whole other session that can get very complicated about the freedom of speech for people to write on there. Do you allow comments on there? How do you edit your comments, especially if they might be racist or you know, or harmful, stuff like that. But we're not going to get into that because that's a whole other area of to do. But if generally speaking, if someone else posts a comment saying, hey, you know, you put something on there about there's a ballot measure, as long as it's neutral, and we'll talk about that in a second, you can do something like that. And if someone comments, hey, I think this is great, you should support it, that's probably going to be okay, because that's not your comment. That is someone else's comment. All right, a little bit about personal expression. You can go ahead and distribute political materials, just not at work, not during work time. You can communicate stuff. Again, it should be during breaks and stuff like that. If you give public presentation and speeches, make sure that it's not on work time, that you identify that this is your personal opinion on your personal time. Meetings, you just got to make sure that if you host some kind of meeting, like the meeting that is tomorrow night for the different counties here in the Valley. It's a very neutral meeting. It's just informational only meetings. And then the law is clear that political buttons and clothing are allowed as long as they don't disrupt the workplace and they meet whatever kind of workplace, I don't want to say uniform, but if there's a dress code for the workplace and the dress code, you know, meets all the other standards of free speech, you know, there's the whole thing about the hair, you know, free speech about hair and other coverings and stuff like that, that is allowed, but they can't disrupt the workplace. All right, as far as using your public resources, it's about equal access. So you could, this is again getting to what the districts are doing tomorrow night. It's kind of an equal access. You could do a candidates forum if you actually wanted to, as long as everyone was invited, everyone was given the same opportunity to speak. I think there's some pitfalls there. I don't know if you'd want to do it. One of the things that was brought up a long time ago was, like, especially in Lane County, where we don't have a county election pamphlet with information. There was the talk a long time ago, long before you, about putting together like a candidate's information packet that anyone in the public could come in and get. That was allowed as long as everyone answered the same questions. It was, the lawyers said, hey, don't even retype it. Just photocopy whatever they write, the same thing, just staple them together and you could hand that to them. You don't want to do any kind of interpretation, and you would offer it for any of the candidates. You could do that. Again, there's some minefields there. If someone wants to use, say, your meeting space to hold a campaign rally, that could be allowed as long as you offered it to everyone on the same basis. Again, might be some minefields, but you could do something like that. It's all about equal access for everyone. All right, someone has their hand up, but I don't know. Oh, Scotty.
Yes. So could you be sure when you go through each of these activities, whether you're talking about employees or directors? So
Yes.
it's got to, okay. So these I think are employees, but I'm not sure.
Well, this is kind of right now. This public resources. This is kind of about the district as an entity.
Including the previous set.
Yeah, including the previous set. Yes, that was employees. Sorry about that. Yes.
Okay, just to be clear, so we understand the difference.
Right. Yes. Exactly. Thank you. All right. You're also allowed to provide impartial information materials. This is probably one of the most important things here is for anyone who's putting a measure on the ballot. If you have, going for a tax base, or if you're going for bonds or anything like that. It has to be impartial. The Secretary of State will review your documents, and then that will provide you safe harbor if anyone brings up that, hey, this isn't impartial. So if you ever do want to publish any materials that related to something on the ballot, including maybe if you are providing information about all the candidates in some kind of pamphlet form, have it reviewed by the Secretary of State. It's free. They do it. And they'll turn around and do it fairly quickly. And then you can't publish any materials that for political advocacy with district resources. So for instance, just as I was talking before, if the board of directors decides to vote on and write a letter for or against something on the ballot, then in that case, you can't go ahead and put it in the newsletter or on your website or Facebook or anything like that, as we talked about. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about lobbying. We just had the legislative session, but there is a new one coming up, and this is I put it in here mostly because this is kind of part of the whole thing. It's also in that pamphlet on advocacy, as we talked about. So we do get these questions about, are districts authorized to lobby? Yes, you are, but only the legislature or other government bodies. That's who you're allowed to lobby. And again, but you do have that restrictions about lobbying for or against ballot measures or candidates. Anything that's on the ballot, again, you can't lobby for. And then the question a lot is like, can we use public funds for this? Yes, but there are certain limitations to that we'll talk about in a second here. So again, if you're going to use public funds, just be really careful about it and make sure that you're only lobbying the legislature or a government entity. So, I mean, the most common one is, and I get this question is hey, we've been asked to provide public comment on a bill, or we want to provide a bill about sage grouse, say. Someone, districts from Eastern Oregon may have something to say about that. Can we send someone there? Can we write a letter to that? Can you do the lobbying? Yes, you can do that. You got to make sure that you don't spend those funds through a political action committee, because if you remember way back in one of the first slides, that was the only thing that wasn't related to ballot. Anything on the ballot was opposing or promoting through a political action committee. So you got to make sure that you do not send money to a political action committee. Okay. Again, you can't use restricted funds because, i.e. grant funding, because in that case, you're using probably those funds outside of what the purpose of the grant was. So that gets to the use about ODA, OWEB operation funds. You can't do any lobbying for that. You can go, however, and provide unbiased, objective information about the effect of a bill, especially if it's related to Measure 76, to the lobbying, and that would be okay. But it's got to be something like you were asked to, and I know there's at least one director on the coast, not director, but manager on the coast, who has come to the legislature because the legislature said, hey, could you provide information on what the effect of this bill might be? And that would be okay. We get to this ministerial duties. This has to do with the fact that, say the board writes a letter in opposition to a certain bill before the legislature. You can ask your manager to write that letter. The letter is going to have to be written by one of the directors. The ministerial duties would be, making copies of it to go in the director's packet. That would be considered ministerial duties, but they can't edit the document. And they can't post it on the website, and things like that. Ministerial duties would be just getting it into the packet, and also, as they say, writing into the minutes that there was a motion and it passed or didn't pass and things like that. The letter should not be mailed by the district. It should be mailed by the district director. So, and that's regarding whether you're using ODA, like district operation funds, for those ministerial duties. If you have other unrestricted funds, always better to do that, so that Sandy or whoever's at OWEB doesn't have to make a judgment call and ask you to change things. Sandy, do you want to add anything to that? Because I know you deal with this more than I do.
I think you're pretty clear, but yes, you have to document well, document. And then if either OWEB, Lolani over at OWEB, or I have a question with your documentation, you'll have clear explanation. So.
Yeah. The other thing we say is, directors are, they don't get paid, and they tend not to use district resources. They use their own resources. So I always say, if there's any kind of like actual lobbying, better for a director to do that lobbying. But on the other hand, if it's maybe providing objective testimony to the legislature about the effects of a bill or something like that, or to your county commissioners or whatever other government entity, that's probably the best for the staff to do. And that would be a great place for the staff to do it, the employees to do it. But leave the lobbying to the directors. I think that's always best. On the other hand, whatever the employee wants to do on their own time with their own resources is totally fine. And I do get that question sometime where a manager has said, hey, I'm actually going to drive all the way to Salem from Eastern Oregon. I really have a strong feeling about this bill before the legislature. And am I allowed to do that? Am I allowed to say, hey, I'm the district manager of XYZ district? And that gets to about the use of title. And yes, that is fine. But they needed to be clear that they were there on their own time, and this was their personal opinion, not the opinion of the district. Even if it might be the same as the opinion of the district, let a director go and speak about the opinion of the district on that. All right, any questions about lobbying? That's a very short thing. I will say that OECD has a great paper on lobbying that goes into great detail. I would hope that it's still on their website. Stan Dean put that together, and it's great. They spend a lot of time going into the very details of that. All right, not a whole lot of questions here, so this will go faster. All right, so the new election laws. Does anyone have any questions regarding director eligibility, the residence address exemption, or any other questions for Sandy? You're a tough crowd today, people. No, not many questions there. Scott, you must have questions. You always have questions. Nope, not even Scott has questions. Oh, Al, you have a question.
Yeah, about the residence address exemption. That's something new since I've come on board. And so even though I'm not running for election this year, I'm in the middle of my term, can I still do my address exemption, or is it too late?
No, you can. Yeah, you can. So someone just asked for an overview of this, so I'll just go over it real quick. So the director eligibility, that of course has to do with the 5 districts and the 5 counties here in the Willamette Valley that have populations over 250,000, and where the 10-acre of ownership or management has been eliminated for the zone directors. But also, as many of you know, because we worked through it, the law also required residency in the zone that you represent, whereas opposed, you could live outside the zone as long as you own or managed acreage in the zone. But now everyone has to live in the zone or have residence in the zone, which is defined by your county clerk as, where you are registered to vote. So that was one big change. I think we worked through that. everyone should really know about that. And if you're doing any kind of recruitment, just remember these changes. The residence address exemption allows a candidate or an existing politician, elected official, and I'm not quite sure, Al, the mechanism for doing that. I think you got to go to the Secretary websites, and they have a whole form you got to fill out, and then I think the Secretary of State will send that to the county clerk. The residence.
That is correct, Eric. It is.
Okay.
It has to be filed directly with the Secretary of State's
Right.
office.
Yeah. So the residence exemption allows you to use an alternative address to your residence for release by the county clerks. You on your candidate form, you let us know you're going to do it. That's part of the law, but you actually have to file with the Secretary of State. What this allows is, as long as there's another way to contact you through a PO box or an alternative physical address, when someone requests the county clerk to release a list of all the, what do they call them, basically people who are eligible to vote, which would normally include your personal address, then it would give your alternative address. Also, if there was any kind of published list of anyone running for office, which we don't do at ODA, but if your district does, I don't know any district that actually does do that, then the alternative address would have to be put on there and not the actual address. Sandy?
I also want to point out, there may be updated legislation on this, but I also want to point out, if somebody does a public records request for your papers that you file for election, we have to release those, and I cannot redact the address. So those are public records once you submit them to ODA.
Yeah. Yes. And that is part of the law. I mean, it's kind of like this exemption, but because it doesn't eliminate the public records request and the fact that your real address can be given out if someone asks for it. Scotty?
Yes. So now what's the legal basis for the residence address exemption? Is that a regulation, or is that a law, or what's the legal basis for it?
Yeah, it's a statute that legislature passed last year. And it's not well written, and there's probably going to be some fixes to it because it's not well written. The Secretary of State had a hard time figuring out how to implement it and everything. And as we said, it doesn't stop someone from making a public records request to get your actual address. As an elected official, there's some things that are not exempt from disclosure. One is your address, one is your phone number, one is your email, and one is your date of birth. Don't ask me why about the date of birth, but that's a public record. That is not exempt. You can, if there's issues of safety, you can request to have that redacted. It's a form you got to fill out. You have to pass a 5-point test, and it's only good for 2 years. So there is a way to keep that personal information safe, or not from public disclosure, but it is quite a few hoops to go through as an elected official.
I don't feel as though I understand the answer. The question I asked maybe is my fault. What's the legal basis? I've read 775, and it just refers to residents. It doesn't talk about other kinds of residents, okay? I was just want to know whether or not this exception thing was something created by regulation, because it's not what the law says.
Well, you probably need to talk to the Secretary of State, I think, to get to your answer, the clear answer. We're going off the what the Secretary of State has told all the election clerks in the state, including Sandy.
And it is a different statute. It is not the it's
not 775.
Yeah.
It's not 775. It's a totally different law that the legislature passed.
Which law is that?
I don't know. Sandy, do you know the number at all?
I want to say Senate Bill 992 or 92992, but I could be wrong, because there's like 3 different ones that affected what I do. So I'm not sure if that's the stipend one or if that's actually the address one, but the Secretary of State could tell you what statute it is and what form it is, and you might even be able to find it on their website, but it is not Senate Bill 775. I know that for a fact.
Yeah. Sorry, Scott. I should have recognized when you said 775 that was the one about the director eligibility. Yeah. So this has to do with all candidates for any elected office across the state, not just SWCDs. Is that clear, Scott?
No, I'll just want to read the law, that's all, and.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, go to the Secretary of State's website because it's all on there.
Okay, well, I asked him about it, not, that's okay, I'll go get my little searching.
Okay, yeah. If I have time, I will see if I can dig it up and email it
No,
to you.
that's okay, I can do my own legwork, that's fine,
Okay.
thank you.
All right, any other questions? Any other things that are happening at your district that regarding elections that you have any questions about? Well, Sandy and I are always here for any other questions, and so thank you for your time. We will be repeating this this evening for any, especially directors or people running for office that couldn't be here today. I also recorded this. We probably will not post the recording on our website, but we've had at least one district who had staff meeting at this time that we're going to send it to, and anyone else who may want it. Just email me and I'll send you the link for it. It'll sit on our servers. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Eric, Scotty still has his hand. I don't know if he has any other questions or if he just didn't lower it.
No, it's just because I messed up the buttons, that's all.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you guys for all coming. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.